Have you ever trusted someone so completely, so blindly, that you never imagined they could be the ones to destroy you? What if I told you that the two people who brought me into this world, who were supposed to protect me and guide me, were the same ones who tried to take everything I had worked for my entire life? This isn't just another story about family conflict or a simple disagreement over money. This is about betrayal at its deepest level, about discovering that the foundation of your entire existence was built on lies, manipulation, and greed. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what does matter is what happened to me, and how one single signature on a document I had never seen before saved me from losing absolutely everything. I'm sharing this with you today because I need you to understand something crucial. The people closest to you, the ones who smile at you across the dinner table, who hug you and tell you they love you, can sometimes be wearing the most convincing masks. And when those masks finally fall, the devastation is unlike anything you could ever prepare yourself for. This is my story, and I'm telling it in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, it will help someone out there recognize the warning signs I ignored for far too long. So settle in, because what I'm about to share with you will take you through the darkest period of my life, through courtrooms and legal documents, through sleepless nights and panic attacks, through confrontations that shattered my soul, and ultimately, through a discovery that proved to be my salvation. Before I dive into the nightmare that consumed nearly 2 years of my life, I need you to understand where I came from. I need you to see the picture-perfect family portrait that everyone else saw, because that contrast, that stark difference between appearance and reality, is what made this betrayal cut so incredibly deep. Growing up, I was the kid everyone thought had it all figured out. My parents seemed supportive, always present at school events, always encouraging my dreams and ambitions. My mother would bake cookies for school fundraisers, my father coached my little league team, and from the outside looking in, we were the American dream personified. But here's what I've learned through this horrific experience. The most dangerous predators are often the ones who know exactly how to blend in, how to play the part, how to make everyone believe there's something they're not. I worked my entire adult life to build something meaningful. After graduating college with honors, I started my own business from the ground up. It wasn't easy. There were countless nights when I survived on ramen noodles and coffee, when I questioned every decision I'd made, when giving up seemed like the only logical option. But I pushed through. I sacrificed relationships, social life, sleep, and so much more to turn my dream into reality. And it worked. By the time I was 32 years old, my business was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. I had employees who depended on me, clients who trusted me, and most importantly, I had built something I was genuinely proud of. Something that was mine. Or at least, that's what I thought. You see, when I first started my business, I was young and inexperienced in so many ways. I understood my industry, I understood my market, but I didn't understand the complex world of business structure, legal protections, and financial safeguards. And that's where my parents came in, offering to help. My father, who had worked in finance for decades, insisted that he could guide me through the incorporation process, help me set up the business properly, make sure everything was done right. He said it would save me thousands in legal fees, and more importantly, it would give him a chance to be part of my success. How could I say no to that? How could I refuse when my own father, with tears in his eyes, told me how proud he was and how much he wanted to help his child succeed? So, I let him. I signed documents he put in front of me, trusting that he had my best interests at heart. I attended meetings with lawyers and accountants he had selected, nodding along as they discussed LLC structures and corporate bylaws and shareholder agreements. It all seemed so overwhelming, so complicated, and I was just grateful to have someone I trusted guiding me through it. My mother played her role too, always there with words of encouragement, always reminding me that family sticks together, that blood is thicker than water, that we Thompsons always look out for each other. She would bring me home-cooked meals when I was working late, check in on me constantly, and create this atmosphere of unwavering family support. And I believed it. God help me. I believed every single word, every gesture, every manufactured moment of parental love. The business grew rapidly over the next several years. We expanded our services, hired more staff, opened a second location, and the revenue started flowing in substantial amounts. I was living comfortably for the first time in my life, able to pay off my student loans, buy a decent car, and even start saving for a house. My parents seemed genuinely happy for my success. They would tell their friends about their entrepreneurial child, show pictures of the business, and bask in the reflected glory of what I had built. At family gatherings, I was the success story, the one who had made it, and my parents positioned themselves as the wise mentors who had guided me to this achievement. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first, so subtle that I almost didn't notice it. My father started asking more detailed questions about the business finances. He wanted to see quarterly reports, profit and loss statements, client contracts. He framed it as concern, as a father's natural interest in his child's well-being, but something about his tone had changed. There was an edge to his questions, an intensity that felt less like parental pride and more like something else entirely, something that made my stomach twist with an anxiety I couldn't quite name. My mother's behavior changed too. She became more insistent about family loyalty, more frequent with her reminders about everything they had done for me, every sacrifice they had made. The home-cooked meals came with side dishes of guilt. The check-in calls became interrogations about my business decisions, my spending habits, my future plans. When I started dating someone seriously, someone I thought might be the one, my mother's reaction was visceral and immediate. She found fault with everything about my partner, created drama at every opportunity, and eventually drove a wedge between us that contributed to the relationship's end. At the time, I thought she was just being an overprotective parent, unable to accept that her child was building a life independent of her influence. Now I understand that she was protecting her investment, making sure nothing and no one threatened their long-term plan. The first real warning sign came during a family dinner about 6 months before everything exploded. We were celebrating my business's 5th anniversary, and I had just signed a major contract that would triple our annual revenue. I was ecstatic, talking enthusiastically about expansion plans and future possibilities. My father listened quietly, barely touching his food, his expression unreadable. When I finished talking, he looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed cold, calculating, and said something that should have set off every alarm bell in my body. He said, "You've done well with our company. We're very proud of the growth we've achieved together. Our company, we've achieved. Not your company, not you've achieved." The pronoun struck me as odd, but when I laughed it off and corrected him, saying it was my company, the look that passed between my parents was chilling. It was a look of shared knowledge, of secrets kept, of plans in motion. My mother quickly smoothed over the moment with her practiced charm, making a joke about parents always feeling ownership over their children's accomplishments, and the conversation moved on. But that moment stuck with me. It planted a seed of doubt that would eventually grow into full-blown suspicion. The real nightmare began on a Tuesday morning in October. I remember the date exactly, because it's burned into my memory like a scar that will never fully fade. October 15th. I arrived at my office to find my father already there, which was unusual. He had a key to the building, something I had given him years ago during the startup phase when he was helping with the initial setup, but he rarely used it. He was sitting in my office, behind my desk, with my computer open in front of him. The presumption of it, the violation of my personal space, immediately set me on edge. When I asked what he was doing, he looked up with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was a mixture of determination, entitlement, and something that looked almost like contempt. He told me we needed to have a serious conversation about the future of the business. He said that he and my mother had been discussing things, and they felt it was time for some changes. They wanted to bring in new management, restructure the company's leadership, and transition toward what he called a more sustainable model. I was confused, completely blindsided by this sudden interest in making major changes to my business. I asked him what he meant, what exactly he was proposing, and that's when he dropped the first bomb. He told me that they weren't proposing anything. They were informing me of decisions that had already been made. He said that as majority shareholders of the company, they had the legal right to make these changes with or without my approval. Majority shareholders. The words didn't make sense. I was the founder, the owner, the person who had built this business from nothing. How could they possibly be majority shareholders? I told him he was mistaken, that he must be confused about how the business was structured. And that's when he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, not the smile of a loving father. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting years to reveal a carefully constructed trap. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. As he spread them across my desk in my office in my building, he began explaining what I was looking at. The incorporation papers I had signed 7 years ago, the ones he had guided me through, the ones I had trusted him to handle correctly, they didn't say what I thought they said. According to these documents, the business wasn't structured as a simple LLC with me as the sole owner. Instead, it was set up as a corporation with multiple shareholders. And the majority of those shares, 51% to be exact, were held jointly by my parents. I was listed as holding 49%. I had somehow, impossibly, made myself a minority owner of my own company. My hands shook as I picked up the documents, scanning through page after page of legal language that suddenly looked nothing like what I remembered signing. How was this possible? I demanded to know what he had done, what kind of fraud he had committed, but he remained calm, almost amused by my distress. He explained that everything was completely legal. I had signed every document voluntarily. My signature was on every page that mattered. And if I didn't believe him, I was welcome to take it to any lawyer I wanted. They would confirm that the paperwork was ironclad. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. The room started spinning. My vision blurred, and I thought I might actually vomit right there on the carpet. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of nightmare that I would wake up from. But my father's voice kept droning on, explaining their plans for the business, their vision for its future, and how I could continue to be involved in a reduced capacity if I chose to cooperate. If I chose to cooperate. As if I had any choice. As if they hadn't just revealed that they had stolen my entire life's work through deception and betrayal. I asked him why. It was all I could manage to say. Just that one word, loaded with all the pain and confusion and disbelief that was tearing me apart from the inside. Why would he do this? Why would they do this? His answer was chillingly pragmatic. He said that they had invested years of their lives helping me, guiding me, supporting me. They had provided the knowledge and expertise that made the business possible in the first place. It was only fair that they received appropriate compensation for their contributions. And besides, they were getting older, thinking about retirement, and they needed to secure their financial future. What better way than through a successful business they had helped create? The justifications kept coming, each one more insulting than the last. But what struck me most was the complete absence of remorse. He genuinely believed he had done nothing wrong. In his mind, he had simply been smart, strategic, taking advantage of an opportunity that presented itself. The fact that the opportunity was his own child's trust and naivety didn't seem to factor into his moral calculations at all. I don't remember exactly what I said next. I know I yelled. I know I told him to get out of my office, out of my building, out of my life. I know I said things about betrayal and trust and what kind of parents could do this to their own child. He listened to my outburst with infuriating patience, like a parent waiting for a toddler's tantrum to subside, and then calmly informed me that this was no longer just my building. It was their building, too. Legally, they had more right to be there than I did. Then he left, taking his folder of damning documents with him, leaving me alone in an office that suddenly felt like foreign territory. I sat there for hours, unable to move, unable to think clearly, unable to process what had just happened. My employees came and went, some knocking on my door to check if I was okay, but I couldn't face them. How could I tell them that the business they worked for, the jobs they depended on, might not actually belong to the person they thought owned it? How could I explain that their boss had been stupid enough, naive enough, trusting enough to sign away her own company to her own parents? That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly around the city, my mind racing through years of memories, re-examining every interaction with my parents through this new, horrifying lens. How long had they been planning this? Was it from the very beginning, when I first told them about my business idea? Or had the plan developed gradually, an opportunistic scheme that grew as they realized how successful the business would become? Every encouraging word, every show of support, every moment of what I thought was parental pride, had it all been manipulation? Had they ever actually loved me? Or had I just been a means to an end, a gullible mark in a long-term con game? The questions tormented me, but I had no answers. What I did know was that I needed help. I needed someone who could tell me if what they had done was really legal, if those documents were truly ironclad, if there was any possible way to fight back against this theft. The next morning, exhausted and operating on nothing but rage and caffeine, I started calling attorneys. The first 3 lawyers I consulted told me essentially the same thing. If I had signed the documents, if my signature was authentic and I had signed voluntarily without coercion, then the corporate structure was legal. One attorney, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who seemed genuinely sympathetic to my situation, explained that this type of scenario was more common than I might think. Parents, business partners, spouses, trusted advisors who slowly position themselves to take control of someone else's work. He said that unless I could prove fraud, duress, or some form of misrepresentation at the time of signing, my options were extremely limited. He suggested I might consider negotiating with my parents, trying to buy back their shares, perhaps coming to some kind of settlement that would give me back control of my company. But the thought of negotiating with them, of treating this betrayal like a business transaction, made me physically ill. Why should I have to buy back what was rightfully mine in the first place? Why should I reward their deception with a payout? The frustration and sense of helplessness was overwhelming. I had built something beautiful, something I was proud of, and now I was being told that legally I had given it away. The injustice of it consumed me. I stopped sleeping more than a few hours a night. I stopped eating regularly. I lost weight, developed stress-related health issues, and found myself having panic attacks at random moments throughout the day. My employees began to notice that something was seriously wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. During this time, my parents made their next move. They started showing up at the office regularly, inserting themselves into business operations, questioning my decisions, and making it clear to everyone that they had authority equal to or greater than mine. My father would walk into client meetings uninvited, my mother would countermand instructions I gave to staff, and together they created an atmosphere of confusion and divided loyalty. Some of my employees, the ones who had been with me from the beginning, were clearly troubled by this sudden shift in dynamics. Others, especially newer hires, didn't understand the history and simply accepted that this was how things worked. The business I had built was being taken from me piece by piece, right before my eyes, and I seemed powerless to stop it. My mother played her role perfectly, as she always had. In public, around my employees and business associates, she was the concerned parent, the supportive mother who just wanted to help her child succeed. But in private, when it was just the three of us, her mask slipped. She told me I was being ungrateful, that I should be thanking them for their foresight rather than fighting them. She said that if I had been smarter, more careful, more business savvy, this never would have happened. Essentially, she blamed me for their betrayal, turning my trust into a character flaw, my love into a weakness. The gaslighting was relentless and expertly executed. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you loved? Have you ever had your reality completely shattered by people you trusted implicitly? Comment below and share your experience because I'm telling you, going through this alone is one of the hardest things I've ever endured. But I wasn't entirely alone, though it took me a while to realize it. One of my senior employees, Marcus, who had been with me since the second year of business, approached me quietly one day. He had noticed the tension, the power struggle, and he could see that I was falling apart. More importantly, he had noticed some irregularities in the way my parents were handling certain business matters. He didn't have proof of anything illegal, but his instincts told him something was very wrong. Marcus gave me the name of an attorney his cousin had used in a complex business dispute. He said this lawyer, Catherine Reynolds, had a reputation for being tenacious, creative, and willing to take on cases that seemed impossible. I was skeptical. I'd already spoken to multiple attorneys who had told me there was nothing to be done, but at this point, I had nothing to lose. I made the appointment for the following week, and as that day approached, I felt a strange mixture of desperate hope and crushing certainty that this too would lead nowhere. The day I met Catherine Reynolds, I walked into her office expecting another sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful consultation. Her office was modest, not one of those imposing law firms with marble lobbies and intimidating receptionists. It was a small practice, just her and two associates working out of a converted brownstone in the older part of downtown. Catherine herself was in her late 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to see right through whatever facade you might be presenting. I sat down and began telling my story, the words tumbling out in a disorganized mess of pain and frustration. I showed her the documents my father had presented, explained how the business had been set up, described the years of what I now understood to be carefully orchestrated manipulation. She listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, her expression giving away nothing of what she might be thinking. When I finally ran out of words, emotionally exhausted and convinced she would tell me the same thing everyone else had, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that sparked the first glimmer of real hope I had felt in weeks. She said, "Let me see every document you signed when the business was incorporated, every single page, and I need the complete corporate records, all meeting minutes, all shareholder communications, everything your parents have filed with the state. Don't leave anything out, even if it seems irrelevant." There was something in her tone, a hint of suspicion or perhaps intuition, that suggested she might be seeing an angle that others had missed. I told her I would get her everything, though I wasn't sure how I would access all the corporate records since my parents were now controlling much of that information. Catherine smiled slightly and said that was actually interesting in itself. If they were restricting my access to corporate records that I, as a shareholder, had a legal right to see, that could be a problem for them. Over the next week, I worked frantically to gather every piece of paper, every email, every digital file related to the business incorporation and structure. Some of it I had in my personal files. Some of it I had to request formally from the business, citing my rights as a shareholder, which prompted angry calls from my father demanding to know what I was doing. I didn't tell him about Catherine. I didn't tell anyone except Marcus, who helped me compile everything quietly and discreetly. When I delivered 3 boxes of documents to Catherine's office, she and her associates dove into them with an intensity that was almost intimidating. She told me it might take a few weeks to review everything thoroughly, and that I should prepare myself for the possibility that even with all this information, we might not find a viable path forward. But she also said something that sustained me through those agonizing weeks of waiting. She said, "In my experience, people who do something this calculated, this deliberately deceptive, usually make a mistake somewhere. They're so confident in their cleverness that they get sloppy with the details. And details are where cases are won or lost." So I waited. And while I waited, the situation at the business continued to deteriorate. My parents became increasingly aggressive in their takeover, making unilateral decisions about company direction, speaking to major clients without my knowledge, and even discussing selling the business to a larger competitor. Something I would never have agreed to, but something they could legally do without my consent as majority shareholders. I was watching my life's work being dismantled, and the powerlessness was suffocating. Finally, after 3 weeks that felt like 3 years, Catherine called me into her office. When I arrived, she had documents spread across every surface: her desk, the conference table, even parts of the floor. Her associates were there too, and all 3 of them looked tired but energized, the way people look when they've been working around the clock on something important. Catherine got straight to the point. She said, "I found something." My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She explained that she and her team had gone through every single page of documentation, cross-referencing signatures, comparing dates, examining the sequence of events and filings. And in that massive pile of paperwork, they had found one document that didn't quite fit. It was a shareholder agreement, dated 2 days after the incorporation papers were filed, that outlined the distribution of shares and the rights associated with those shares. My signature appeared on this document, right there on the signature line at the bottom. But here's what Catherine had noticed. The signature didn't quite match my other signatures. It was close, very close, but there were subtle differences in the way certain letters were formed. She had compared it to my signature on the original incorporation documents, to my signature on contracts with clients, to my signature on routine business paperwork, and to my signature on the document I had signed when retaining her services. The signature on this crucial shareholder agreement was different enough to raise questions, but it wasn't just the signature that caught Catherine's attention. It was the timing and circumstances. She walked me through her reasoning step by step. The incorporation documents I had definitely signed showed the business being set up as a standard LLC with me as the sole owner. Those were legitimate, properly filed, and exactly what I thought I was signing. But then, 2 days later, this shareholder agreement appeared, which essentially converted the ownership structure and distributed shares to my parents. I had no memory of signing this document. I certainly didn't remember meeting with anyone 2 days after the incorporation to sign additional paperwork. And when Catherine showed me the witness signature on the document, required in our state for this type of agreement, it was someone I had never heard of. Someone who supposedly witnessed me signing this document at a time and place I couldn't account for. Catherine then showed me something else she had discovered. The original LLC filing, the one I definitely remembered doing, had been amended 4 months after incorporation. The amendment changed the business structure from an LLC to a corporation and listed my parents as shareholders. This amendment also bore my signature, but again, I had no memory of signing it. More importantly, the address listed for me on this amendment was my parents' house, not my own address. And the email associated with the filing was an email account I had never seen before, though it was in my name. The picture Catherine painted was becoming clearer and more damning with each detail. She believed, though she couldn't yet prove, that my parents had created these additional documents and forged my signature. They had used their access to my personal information, their familiarity with my signature, and their position of trust to create a false paper trail that showed me voluntarily giving them majority ownership. The original incorporation I had done was legitimate. Everything after that was potentially fraudulent. But here's where it got complicated, Catherine explained. Proving signature forgery isn't as straightforward as it might seem. We would need a forensic document examiner, someone who could analyze the signatures and potentially testify that they weren't authentic. We would need to establish that I wasn't at the location specified when these documents were allegedly signed. We would need to prove that the witness who supposedly saw me sign was either non-existent or complicit in the fraud. And we would need to do all of this while my parents had access to expensive legal representation and would undoubtedly fight back with every resource they had. The case Catherine was proposing would be difficult, expensive, and emotionally devastating. It would mean publicly accusing my parents of fraud and forgery. It would mean potentially criminal charges, not just civil litigation. It would mean months or possibly years of legal battle, with no guarantee of success. And it would mean the permanent destruction of any relationship with my parents, though honestly, that felt like it was already gone. I sat in her office, looking at that signature that was mine but not quite mine, and I had to make a decision. I could walk away, accept that I had been outmaneuvered by people more ruthless than I could have imagined, and try to rebuild something new. Or I could fight, knowing that the fight itself would consume me, cost me everything I had, and might still end in failure. Have you ever faced a choice where every option felt impossible? Where you knew that no matter what you decided, you would lose something irreplaceable? I want to hear about it in the comments because I'm telling you, that moment in Catherine's office was one of the darkest of my entire life. But as I sat there, something crystallized inside me. It wasn't about the money, though the business was worth a substantial amount by this point. It wasn't even entirely about the business itself, though I had poured my soul into building it. It was about the principle. It was about refusing to let people get away with this level of betrayal and deception. It was about standing up and saying that this was wrong, that what they had done was wrong, and that I would not go quietly into the night while they profited from their manipulation. I looked at Catherine and told her to proceed with the case. I authorized her to hire the forensic document examiner, to begin building our evidence, to file whatever legal actions were necessary. I told her I didn't care what it cost me, financially or emotionally. I was going to fight. The relief on her face was visible. She had clearly hoped I would make this choice, and she promised me that she would do everything in her power to get me justice. But she also warned me that once we started down this path, there would be no turning back. My parents would know I was challenging them, and they would retaliate. The gloves would come off on both sides. I told her I understood and that I was ready. I wasn't really ready. No one can truly be ready for what was about to happen, but I was committed. Catherine moved quickly. Within days, she had hired Dr. Ellen Martinez, a renowned forensic document examiner who had testified in dozens of high-profile cases. Dr. Martinez began her analysis of the disputed signatures, using techniques I didn't fully understand involving microscopy, spectral analysis, and comparison to known authentic samples. While she worked on that aspect, Catherine and her associates began investigating the witness who had supposedly seen me sign the shareholder agreement. They discovered that this person, a name that meant nothing to me, was actually a former employee of the accounting firm my father had used for decades. More digging revealed that this person had been present at several business meetings my father had attended, but I had never met them. The implication was clear. This was someone my father knew, someone who might have been willing to falsely witness a document for reasons we were still trying to uncover. Meanwhile, Catherine filed a lawsuit alleging fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. The moment those papers were served to my parents was the moment everything truly exploded. They responded with fury and aggressive legal maneuvering that honestly shocked me with its intensity. They hired one of the most expensive law firms in the state, a team of attorneys whose hourly rates were astronomical. Their strategy became immediately apparent. They would bury us in motions, discovery requests, and procedural challenges, trying to bankrupt me and force me to abandon the case. They filed counterclaims alleging that I was making fraudulent accusations, damaging their reputation, and breaching my fiduciary duties as an officer of the corporation. They sought not just to defend themselves, but to destroy me financially and legally. The next 6 months were a special kind of hell. Every aspect of my life was scrutinized, questioned, and picked apart. Depositions where my parents' attorneys asked invasive questions about my competence, my business acumen, my mental health, trying to paint a picture of someone who was unstable and couldn't be trusted to accurately remember what documents she had or hadn't signed. Discovery demands that required me to turn over years of personal records, emails, text messages, anything that might be twisted to support their narrative. And through it all, the business continued to suffer. The legal battle was public record, and rumors spread through our industry like wildfire. Clients became nervous, some taking their business elsewhere rather than being associated with a company embroiled in such dramatic litigation. Employees started leaving, uncomfortable with the toxic atmosphere and uncertain about the company's future. The revenue that had been steadily growing began to decline. and I watched helplessly as everything I had built started crumbling around me. My parents showed no mercy. In court filings, they portrayed me as an ungrateful child who had always been difficult, who had mental health issues that made my perceptions unreliable, who was now lashing out because I wasn't mature enough to share credit for the business's success. They dredged up things from my childhood, therapists I had seen as a teenager, academic struggles I had overcome, relationships that had ended badly, twisting everything into evidence of my supposed instability. The character assassination was methodical and brutal. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the emotional toll seemed too high, when I questioned whether any amount of justice was worth this level of suffering. I cried more during those months than I had in my entire life. I had nightmares about courtrooms and signatures and my parents' faces twisted with contempt. I developed anxiety so severe that I had to start medication just to function day to day. But Catherine kept me grounded. She reminded me constantly that this was exactly what they wanted, that this aggressive strategy was designed to break me, and that the best revenge was to refuse to be broken. And then, 8 months into the litigation, Dr. Martinez completed her forensic analysis. I will never forget the day Catherine called me to her office to review the findings. Dr. Martinez was there in person, and she laid out her conclusions with scientific precision and absolute certainty. The signature on the shareholder agreement was not mine. Dr. Martinez had analyzed dozens of characteristics: pen pressure, letter formation, spacing, angles, flow patterns, and more technical aspects than I could fully comprehend. She had compared the disputed signature to over 30 authenticated examples of my signature from various points in time. Her conclusion, which she stated she could defend in court with absolute confidence, was that the signature on the shareholder agreement was a simulation. Someone had attempted to copy my signature, and they had done a decent job, but it was not authentic. Moreover, she had analyzed the signature on the LLC amendment that changed the business structure, and she reached the same conclusion. That signature was also a forgery. But here's what made her findings even more powerful. She had also analyzed other signatures on these documents, including my father's signatures, and those were authentic, which meant my father had signed documents that contained forged versions of my signature. He had witnessed these documents being filed with the state. Documents he knew or should have known contained fraudulent signatures. The evidence of deliberate fraud was now substantial and supported by an expert who could withstand cross-examination. Catherine immediately filed amended complaints, adding claims for criminal fraud, and moved for summary judgment on certain aspects of the case. She also sent copies of Dr. Martinez's report to the district attorney's office, suggesting that criminal charges might be appropriate. The DA's office began their own investigation. When my parents and their attorneys received Dr. Martinez's report, their response was predictable but still shocking in its audacity. They claimed that I must have forgotten signing the documents, that the stress of the litigation was affecting my memory, and that their own handwriting expert would dispute Dr. Martinez's findings. They suggested that perhaps I had been drinking or exhausted when I signed, and that explained the signature variations. They threw every possible alternative explanation at the wall, hoping something would stick. But their legal position was weakening, and everyone knew it. The procedural motions and aggressive tactics slowed down. Their attorneys started making overtures about settlement, suggesting that perhaps we could resolve this matter without further litigation. Catherine's response was firm. The only settlement I would consider was a complete return of the business to my sole ownership, a formal acknowledgement of what they had done, and reimbursement for all my legal costs. My parents rejected these terms, but the fact that they were even discussing settlement showed that they knew their position was becoming untenable. The case was headed for trial, and as we approached the trial date, Catherine and her team prepared meticulously. We had Dr. Martinez ready to testify. We had the investigation into the supposed witness who had seen me sign documents. We had evidence of my parents' suspicious behavior, their sudden increased interest in the business finances right before these disputed documents appeared, and their aggressive attempts to take control immediately after the documents were filed. We had expert testimony about the timing inconsistencies and the suspicious address and email information. And we had something else that emerged during discovery. Email communications between my parents discussing their retirement plans and mentioning the business as their nest egg and their security, dated from before the business was even incorporated. These emails strongly suggested premeditation, that they had planned from the very beginning to position themselves as owners of my business. The trial was scheduled to last 3 weeks. The weekend before it was set to begin, I was a wreck. Catherine tried to prepare me for what was coming, the testimony I would have to give, the cross-examination I would face, The likelihood that I would have to sit there and listen to my parents lie under oath, painting me as mentally unstable or dishonest. She warned me that trials are unpredictable, that even with strong evidence, juries can be swayed by unexpected factors, and that I needed to prepare myself for any outcome. That Sunday night before the trial was supposed to start Monday morning, I was at home trying unsuccessfully to sleep when my phone rang. It was Catherine calling at 11 p.m., which immediately set my heart racing. She told me that my parents' attorneys had just contacted her with a new settlement proposal. My parents were willing to sign over their claimed shares back to me, acknowledging that there had been errors in the corporate paperwork, in exchange for me agreeing not to pursue criminal charges and not to publicly discuss the settlement terms. It was a complete capitulation, though they were still trying to save face by characterizing it as mutual settlement rather than admission of fraud. Catherine said the decision was mine, but she laid out the considerations clearly. If we proceeded to trial and won, which she believed we would get a court judgment in my favor, a public vindication, and possibly criminal consequences for my parents. But it would also mean 3 more weeks of trial testimony, the continued hemorrhaging of my business reputation and finances, and the ongoing emotional devastation. If I accepted this settlement, I would get my business back immediately, could begin rebuilding, and could end this nightmare without further trauma. But I would have to let them escape significant consequences for what they had done, and I would have to keep silent about the whole affair. It was an impossible choice, and yet I knew I had to make it immediately. The settlement offer was contingent on acceptance before the trial started, a pressure tactic designed to force my hand. I asked Catherine what she thought I should do, and she said something I will always remember. She said, "I became a lawyer to get people justice. But I've learned over the years that justice comes in different forms. Sometimes it's a courtroom victory and a judge's ruling. Sometimes it's getting your life back and the freedom to move forward. Only you can decide which form of justice you need." I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, thinking about everything I had been through, everything I had lost, everything I had learned about trust and betrayal, and the darkness that can hide inside the people we love. And I realized that what I wanted most was not revenge, as satisfying as that might be in the moment. What I wanted was my life back. What I wanted was the freedom to rebuild without this hanging over me. What I wanted was to sever all ties with these people who had hurt me so profoundly and never have to think about them again. I told Catherine to accept the settlement on one condition, that in addition to returning the shares, my parents would also resign from any and all positions or claims to involvement with the business, and that they would sign a document prohibiting them from ever contacting me again. Catherine called back an hour later to say they had agreed to all terms. The settlement was executed the next morning, Monday, in a conference room at the courthouse where the trial was supposed to begin. My parents were there with their attorneys. I was there with Catherine. We sat on opposite sides of a large table, and not once did any of us make eye contact. The documents were signed in cold silence, their signatures transferring their fraudulent shares back to me. My signature on an agreement not to pursue criminal prosecution. Everyone's signatures on a non-disclosure agreement. And then it was over. They left through one door, I left through another, and I have not seen or spoken to them since that day. The relief was overwhelming, a physical sensation of weight lifting off my shoulders. But so was the grief, because even though I had won, even though I had gotten my business back, I had lost my parents. Or rather, I had lost the illusion of parents that I had believed existed. I had to grieve not just for the relationship I once had with them, but for the relationship I had always thought we had, which I now understood had never truly existed at all. The aftermath of all this has been complicated and ongoing. Getting the business back was just the beginning of rebuilding. So many clients had left during the legal battle. So many employees had found other positions, and the company's reputation had been damaged by the very public dispute. I had to essentially relaunch the business, working twice as hard as I had during the startup phase to prove that we were stable, reliable, and not the dysfunctional mess that the litigation had made us appear to be. Financially, the legal fees had devastated my personal savings. Even with the settlement requiring my parents to reimburse some of my legal costs, the amount didn't cover everything, and I was left with substantial debt that took years to pay off. The business itself was still profitable, but the momentum we had been building was gone, and it took another 3 years of relentless work to get back to the level we had been at before everything fell apart. Emotionally, the scars run even deeper. I've been in therapy consistently since this happened, working through the betrayal, the trust issues, the complicated grief of losing parents who turned out to be something monstrous. I've had to completely recalibrate my understanding of relationships, learning to trust people again, while also maintaining appropriate boundaries and protections. It's an ongoing process, and honestly, I'm not sure I'll ever fully heal from what they did, but I am healing. I've built a new support system of friends who stood by me through the worst of it, employees who remained loyal even when things looked bleakest, and a romantic partner who I met after all this was over and who has been incredibly patient with my baggage and struggles. I've learned to recognize red flags in relationships and business dealings. I've become much more careful about legal protections and documentation. And I've learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we never expected to hurt us at all. The business today is thriving again, even stronger than before in many ways, because I've surrounded myself with people who genuinely support me and share my vision. We've implemented new systems, new safeguards, and a culture of transparency that ensures something like this could never happen again. Every document is reviewed by multiple people. Every major decision is documented and verified. And I've educated myself extensively about business law, corporate structure, and financial protections so that I will never again be vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. As for my parents, I honestly don't know what's become of them. The non-disclosure agreement prevents me from discussing the specifics publicly, and I've chosen to share this story in a way that protects certain identifying details while still conveying the truth of what happened. I know they moved to another state shortly after the settlement, possibly to escape the whispers and judgment from people in our community who knew what had transpired. I know that other family members, my extended relatives, largely sided with me once the details emerged, and many of them cut contact with my parents as well. But beyond that, I don't know and I don't want to know. They made their choices, they lived with the consequences, and my focus has been entirely on moving forward rather than looking back. I share this story with you today, all these years later, because I think it's important for people to understand several things. First, that betrayal can come from anywhere, from anyone, even from the people who are supposed to love you most. You can't live your life in constant suspicion, but you should trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't quite articulate why. Second, that there are people out there, attorneys like Catherine, friends like Marcus, who will stand with you when things fall apart. Finding those people and holding on to them is crucial. Third, that fighting back against injustice is possible, even when it seems hopeless. There were so many moments when I thought I had lost, when I was certain that my parents would get away with what they had done, but persistence and the right help made all the difference. And finally, that recovery is possible. The person I am now is different from the person I was before all this happened. I'm more cautious, more guarded, and I carry scars that will never fully fade. But I'm also stronger, wiser, and more deeply appreciative of genuine kindness and loyalty. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by who stands with you when everything is falling apart. I've learned that success isn't just about building something, but about protecting it and fighting for it when necessary. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest victory is simply surviving, rebuilding, and refusing to let the people who hurt you define who you become. So I want to ask you, have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Have you learned painful lessons about protecting yourself in your work? I want to hear your stories in the comments below, because I know I'm not alone in having experienced something like this, and there's power in sharing our experiences and supporting each other. If this story resonated with you, if it touched something in your heart or reminded you of your own struggles, please leave a like on this video. Your engagement helps this channel reach more people who might need to hear this message, who might be going through their own battles and need to know that they're not alone. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to My Truth Revealed Tales for more stories like this one, real experiences from real people about the challenges we face and how we overcome them. These stories matter. Your stories matter. And by sharing them, by listening to each other, we create a community of people who understand that life is complicated, painful, beautiful, and worth fighting for. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos, because I can promise you that there are more powerful stories coming, more lessons learned through struggle, and more evidence that no matter how dark things get, there is always a path forward. Thank you for listening to my story, for being here with me, and for being part of this community. Until next time, remember that you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and worthy of fighting for what's rightfully yours. Take care of yourselves out there.